Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, formally rejected the BRICS invitation. This move was expected as Milei has made it clear his strategies will align with the United States as it begins a path to convert the country's currency to the dollar. Let's also not forget that during his presidential campaign, he said the BRICS membership is obviously not an option as Argentina will not make pacts with communists, talking specifically about China. However, some recent events will show that Milei has started to walk those comments back. So in this video, let's talk about what's changed for Argentina and why they could be reconsidering the BRICS membership. But before we get into any of that, we need to talk about the mess that is Argentina's economy and what has actually changed since Milei took office. Milei and his team inherited a country that just went over 200% annual inflation, hitting the highest mark in the last 30 years. And in just December alone, it reached 30% monthly inflation. And unfortunately, people are just getting poorer because wages are not climbing at the same rate that inflation is, and the country sports a 40% poverty rate as confidence in the currency is dwindling. It's not just everyday items like groceries that have been impacted by this, but this has actually trickled down into the housing market. As the peso becomes increasingly worthless in the country, landlords are no longer accepting the currency. 70% of long-term leases are being priced in the dollar, a number that was only 27% just a couple years ago. More homes are becoming empty, and average earners are finding it harder and harder to afford a roof over their head, and homelessness is skyrocketing. Oh, and Argentina still has a $40-something billion loan to the International Monetary Fund that they may never be able to pay off. This debt problem is going to soon collide with their limited currency reserve problem, specifically dollars. Argentina owes bondholders a lot of money too. In fact, they have $1 billion of debt outstanding today, and by January 2025, this will triple to $3 billion. A good portion of these expenses will be interest payments alone, one of the major downfalls to a continuous debt cycle. So how is this dollarization thing actually going to work for Argentina when they don't have any dollars? Argentina obviously does not control the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, meaning Argentina is at the mercy of their monetary policy and inflationary measures like printing the currency. Let's look at what the narrative is out there for Milei and Argentina's economy, and the first place I go to look for stuff like this is Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that makes it very easy to compare coverage on a story from around the world. So let's look at a very recent story, one we have already talked about in this video. Argentina's inflation surpasses 200%. What I love about Ground News is they tell me all the sources that have written on the topic and what political spectrum they fall in, left, center, or right. Then I can go to the Ground News AI and get a quick glimpse for what the lean is for each spectrum. For this story, the left focused on the negative aspects of Milei's policy and uses loaded language like shock measures. The center emphasizes experts' concerns over higher consumer prices, and the right remain neutral and informative. From there, I can click on any article I want and it will take me to the original source so I can read the story for myself. Ground News will change the way you consume the news going forward. So to check them out for yourself, the link is in the description. Now back to the video. So there's really only two options for Argentina to get more dollars, and the first one is to increase their exports around the world in exchange for dollars. This is a very interesting discussion as Argentina's top two trade partners, Brazil and China, of course, they're a part of BRICS, a topic we're going to talk about later on in the video. The second way to get more dollars is to borrow dollars from investors, a strategy that has been explored by Milei and his team, and so far, it's been a complete disaster. For 2 weeks in a row, Argentina has tried to entice investors with what are known as reconstruction bonds. The purpose of these bonds is to help pay down their debt to suppliers. Yes, someone else that they owe money to. And on the surface, these bonds seem like a pretty good deal. Investors would buy the bonds in pesos, and then the payout would be received in dollars once they mature with a 5% interest on top. But for 2 weeks now, it's very clear no one wants these. Week 1, the central bank announced they only sold $68 million worth of a maximum $750, and week 2, they only sold $57 million out of $750. Argentina has a negative trade balance month after month after month, meaning they are exporting less than they are importing, and they are bleeding dollars as more is leaving the country than coming coming in. Basically, all of this leads to a situation that no one, literally no one, thinks Argentina will be able to pay back any of their debt, a reason why their recent bond offerings were a complete flop. But Milei, being a former economist, is trying every trick he has in his arsenal. His next attempt is a debt swap for about $70 billion, and what this means is he wants banks to roll over their existing notes for new debt that matures further down the road. Think of it as the kick the can down the road strategy, pushing today's problem into tomorrow. The swap aims to stabilize Argentina's finances and reduce the fiscal deficit to zero for this year. This debt includes notes with interest payments tied to inflation, the exchange rate, and fixed rate bonds, with approximately 40% of the debt in the private sector. The success of this strategic move largely depends on the response of creditors and the confidence of financial markets in the government's fiscal policy. Either way, I think we can all agree that Milei is scrambling right now to try and hold his promise he made to the Argentine citizens. But what about the promise he made about not making pacts with communists? Before we get into that, I make videos about world news impacting the dollar, so if you like videos like this talking about Argentina's economy and want to see more of them, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here's the clip where Javier Milei was being very intentional when speaking about Argentina's two largest trade partners, Brazil and China, both countries of course being founding members of BRICS. The interview was done in Spanish, dubbed in English. Take a listen.
And what about Brazil? It's the country's most important trade partner. You've spoken harshly about Lula in the past. Can you have a closer relationship?
No.
And what about China? It's one of the main trading partners.
It might be a business partner with the private sector. However, we do not make pacts with communists.
At the time he said this, it was an interesting stance, as the country relies so much on Brazil and China, making up about 40% of all international trades. And in his official letter to BRICS rejecting the invitation, he said it did not feel appropriate to become a full member, as his foreign policy ideology was very different from the previous government's. But here's the important part. He said he was still committed to strengthening bilateral ties and increasing trade and investment flows. He's trying to have his cake and eat it too. It's almost like he just realized how important working with China is for Argentina's economy. But words do have consequences, and because of that, China pulled back a $6.5 billion currency swap it agreed to with the previous Argentine government until Milei demonstrates a clear intention to work with China. The funding is part of a deal renewed annually since 2009, crucial for Argentina due to its negative holdings of international dollar reserves. Argentina has relied on such swaps as one of its few credit options, given their reputation for defaulting on international debt, and the funds have been primarily intended to bolster imports and meet their endless obligations to the IMF. So we will likely see a softer approach from Argentina when it comes to China, because the $6.5 billion currency swap seems critical in the short term. This ties into another promise Milei made during his campaign, which was to significantly reduce the size of the Argentine government and cut certain administrations within the government while looking to privatize more industries. This is where China comes back into play, because while Milei was not that interested in working with China on a government level, he seemed okay to be trading with China in the private sector. So we will see how this part shakes out, but Milei will have his hands full soon, as he decided not to renew over 5,000 government employees for 2024 and beyond. And this is leading to a union strike at the end of January, which means people will be sitting at home, not working, not contributing to the economy, which will obviously make this economic recovery even harder. The snowball effect is coming. Exports will drop, investors will be non-existent, and dollars will still be flowing out of the country even faster than before because imports will still be needed, all leading to a possible default. Argentina needs a constant flow of dollars to stay afloat, and with their rejection to BRICS, their only savior left is the United States. This is nowhere near the end of the story. I made a playlist talking about Argentina's journey to dollarizing their economy. So if this topic interests you and want to see more of it, make sure to check out this playlist here.